There's a military doctrine called responsibility to protect, and President Obama used it to justify going into Libya. It basically calls for the UN and other groups to invade a nation's borders when its people are threatened. And one of the biggest promoters of this doctrine is mega liberal George Soros. This can't be good. Earlier this evening, I asked Aaron Klein from WorldNet Daily to lay out the connection between Soros and the White House on this one.
In fact, it goes quite deep. Soros is the primary funder, one of three non-governmental funders of the main organization. It's called the Global Organization to Protect, Responsibility to Protect. George Soros, one of three primary sponsors of this organization, whose founders actually wrote the doctrine. And it turns out that Samantha Power, President Obama's national security advisor, a special advisor on human rights issues, has gone to multiple panels with some of the founders of this doctrine that come from this George Soros-funded organization, and she was incredibly instrumental in helping President Obama, according to reports, make the decision to go to war in Libya.
Look, I get it. George Soros, not a great guy. Shorted the American economy in stocks and derivatives and benefited when we fell apart. He made a ton of money, billions of dollars on that. I get it. He's no friend of ours, no friend of mine. But just because he sits on a board with Samantha Power, does that mean he has her ear? And does that mean, by de facto, Obama has Soros's ear through Samantha Power?
Soros is the main sponsor, one of three of Responsibility to Protect, of the global forum that actually wrote this act. So, yes, he's incredibly influential, and a lot of the people on the board, by the way, also sit on other organizations, like one called the International Crisis Group, which has been very strangely involved in the unrest and supporting the unrest in the Middle East and North Africa. Soros is all over this. Samantha Power may be one of the ways that the decision-making process indeed went up to the highest levels of the Obama administration, and the United States acted as a test to this doctrine, Responsibility to Protect, in Libya. But again, concerned that this doctrine can be applied to other countries, maybe even one day the United States of America, because the International Criminal Court has in the past accused us of atrocities in Iraq and Afghanistan.
All right. Aaron Klein, we're going to have to leave it there, my friend. Thanks for joining us. Aaron Klein, WorldNet Daily. Thank you, sir. Frank Gaffney is with us from the Center for Security Policy, which searches for emerging threats to national security. Frank, you saw that report. How involved is George Soros in this Libyan attack, would you say?
I think it's hard to say with precision, but I find that a lot of places where things are going on that are fundamentally contrary to our interests, George Soros is involved. And you can argue that that's cause and effect. You can argue that it's just coincidence. But I think we've got to appreciate that, particularly when it comes to trying to get the United States government to adopt this kind of open-ended policy to basically do what other people, as President Obama put it the other day, volunteer us for, is something that would be completely consistent with Soros's idea that you know, we ought to diminish the United States as a superpower, and we ought to be raising up people who are hostile to us.
Now,
very troubling.
Soros sits on some boards with Samantha Power. Samantha Power happens to be an advisor to President Obama. Does that scare you?
Well, look, it's not just that they are on boards together, it is that they are intellectual and ideological soulmates, as are many of the people who comprise the Obama administration.
Frank,
that's worrying
Mr. Soros
because they're pushing us in a very dangerous direction.
Financially benefited from the fall of the U.S. dollar.
Among others. He's cratered a whole bunch of economies and destroyed some nations in the process. As I say, the guy is, I think, fundamentally working at cross purposes with American national security interests. In this particular instance, I think the jury is still out, but writ large, there's no doubt about it, and his connections to a number of folks in the Obama administration, not just Samantha Powers, but the people who are, I think, at the sort of cutting ideological edge of the administration, is what I worry about big time.
All right, Frank, don't move. Stay right there. I want my next guest to join us. With tensions hitting the boiling point in the Middle East, what's next? What region, what country is ready to erupt in violence? Please welcome attorney Yasser Tabara, a human rights lawyer and community activist who's an expert on the region. Thank you for joining us. So what do you make of this? What do you make of all this going on in Libya? Boy, we're seeing a lot of scary things going on there. And for us in America, not used to seeing some of the things. We're seeing people accusing Gaddafi of raping them. We're seeing journalists being taken and not seen for days at a time. Sexual assaults on other journalists. It's a scary time.
It is. It is in terms of the context of what's happening in Libya at the moment. But I think you have to kind of take a step back and take a look at the larger context. I mean, what's been referred to as unrest in the Middle East is really a sweeping pro-democracy movement. I mean, people here in the United States, there's been this point of view that was advocated on your show.
Is it in fact a pro-democracy movement? Because you can say Egypt,
when I see a Tunisian,
you could say Egypt, you could say Libya, but sir, allow me, Iran. How is that pro-democracy? I mean, there was nothing pro-democratic about what went on in Iran, and they were slaughtering citizens, their own citizens.
There are no mass protests and demonstrations by the Iranian people at this moment in time. What I'm talking about is what started in Tunisia about 3 months ago, when the entire Tunisian population took it to the streets and decided to hold their leader of 30 years accountable. And this is a movement of an ideological movement, not Islamist movement.
I hate to cut you off, sir.
By millions of youth.
I hate to cut you off. Guys, take this package. We found this today. It was sent to us, and we want you to take a look and maybe react to this. Take a look what some other people think is really going on in the Middle East.
CBN News has obtained an exclusive copy of a propaganda video that's reportedly been approved at the highest levels of the Iranian government. It's called The Coming is Near, and it describes current events in the Middle East as a prelude to the coming of the mythical 12th Imam, or Mahdi, the Messiah figure who Islamic scriptures say will lead the armies of Islam to victory over all non-Muslims in the last days.
Sir, do you want to comment on that, Mr. Tabara?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm not a spokesperson on behalf of the Iranian government. In fact, I take issue with much of the Iranian government's policies in terms of their policies in the region, in terms of their human rights records, in terms of what they do to their own people. And I truly hope for that wave of pro-democracy movement to infect the Iranian population and to take it to the streets themselves and to go towards a democratic regime. Now,
Mr. Tabara, I want to get Frank Gaffney in here. Frank, please, will you comment on this? I mean, is this outlandish, or is this part of a belief that's spreading throughout the Middle East?
Look, what has just been said, that there is a democratic fervor that is going to translate into something that we would recognize as democratic, is farcical. It is in fact the case that the people who are going to prosper out of this ferment, this revolutionary tumult, are going to be the Muslim Brotherhood and to some extent the Iranians, who Mr. Tabara says he doesn't support. What we are unfortunately confronting, I'm afraid, is something that will be considerably worse from not only the perspective of American interests, but also from the perspective of the people most immediately involved. They're going to get theocracy, not democracy.
Mr. Tabara, are you sure these rebels, whoever end up taking over power in Libya, are you sure they're friends of ours?
Well, I'm hearing a larger question here, Eric. I'm hearing a question that puts the entire pro-democracy movement in the Arab world right now as a hostage to the Muslim Brotherhood, which is absolutely absurd. I was in Egypt. I came back about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. I met with the revolutionaries down there. I've talked to the people that basically have access to the highest echelons of power. There's the propaganda that the scarecrow of the Muslim Brotherhood taking over these pro-democratic movements is absolutely absurd. It's an undermining of what's actually taking place.
We're going to have to.
I mean, what I would like to point out is Mr. Gaffney got it right on Iraq, and he's again getting it right.
Listen,
got it wrong on Iraq, and now he's getting it right again.
We don't have time to go into depth on this, but I got to tell you, any further in depth, I got to tell you, when you look at Iran, when you look at Yemen, when you look at Bahrain, we're not sure everything is quite pro-democracy yet, but we have to leave it there. I apologize.
We'll
bring you guys both back for another segment at another time.
I would love that.
Thank you, Frank Gaffney and Yasser Tabara, for joining us tonight.